Hi, my name is Mark Drenot. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I want to talk about why the Kharkiv offensive, the summer or spring offensive of Russia, is a bluff. It's a complete bluff, and there is no way they're going to achieve anything if they even attempt something beyond a bluff. And first, I'd like to segue. Sorry, I've been kind of disconnected. I've a lot of responsibilities, academic responsibilities, and I really want to do economic videos, but at this point, I think we're at a critical juncture in the war in Ukraine and Russia, and I want to just lay it on the table that the spring, or at least now summer offensive of Russia is a bluff. If you go by the numbers, using probability tables embedded in any kind of game system, the adage is you need 3-to-1 advantage. That's firepower. Right now, there's 50,000 Russian troops in front of Kharkiv or around Kharkiv. The Ukrainians have 4 brigades, and if you are a conservative estimate, you can say that's 16,000 troops. You say, oh, so Russia clearly has an advantage. But remember that these are embedded troops in defensive network and bunkers. And so usually the minimum you do is ×2. But before we do that, we have to also account for the efficiency ratios. I would take down, even if it was 0.78, let's be generous, and the Russian efficiency ratio is 0.8, which means 50,000 troops equal about 40,000 because of the logistical inefficiencies in the command structure. In contrast, the Ukrainians are more efficient, and you can say they're 1.2. So using round numbers, and it just seems to work out, Ukraine has 20,000 defenders if you account for the efficiency ratio, and the Russians have 40,000. So that's 2-to-1. But whenever you have a defensive position, minimum it's 2-to-1 defense. So it bumps Ukraine up to 50-50, even odds, 40,000 to 40,000 in firepower. Now that doesn't include, of course, drones, aircraft, and all the other things going on. But you have to say, just as a proxy, because we can't calculate that effectively, that troops on the ground represent a reasonable estimation or extension of firepower. So 1-to-1, that's on the battlefield, ceteris paribus. Nothing else changes. There's not a chance. At a patrol level, you may gain meters here, meters there. Now, the city of Kharkiv has over 1.4 million people, and you can whittle it down to an estimated defense force. If faced with an existential threat, they could muster almost 590,000 troops. You can say 600,000 people in an existential threat if you include able-bodied working people, male and female, within reason. In addition to that, you've got great communication, bunkers, industrial areas and regions which are extremely defensive. So it is impossible, if that's 600,000, and that's not even accounted for, defensive multipliers and morale multipliers, it would be impossible, and I can say this 100% impossible, for Russia to take Kharkiv. Their offensive will most likely be repelled. At 1-to-1 odds, it's 50-50, slight defender retreat, slight defender advance. In order to achieve anything actually on the battlefield without even touching the city, they'd have to have at least 150,000 to achieve 3-to-1 ratio, and there's still 30% attack or retreat. At 4-to-1, 200,000, and the Russians don't even have it in them. They don't even have that complete network be able to muster and logistically put on the field in battle ready. It's the 200,000 at 4-to-1, and even 4-to-1 is not guaranteed. And even if they could do that, it brings them at the city's edge, the outskirts, in which the defensive forces, again, existential threat defensive forces would come into play. So what are they doing? Well, it's a bluff, because I've examined Russian history from the very beginning of Moscow to the current day, and I've never found an instance. And you can look at modern day Chechnya, Syria, Ukraine, but you can go all the way back to Ivan, the Terrible, etc. And I've never seen an instance to Stalin where Russia prioritizes life preservation and the greater good over geopolitical gains. It's always about mass and attrition, where Ukraine has a prioritization of the greater good and life preservation. However, a component of that is this freedom and their territory, because that would not be optimized if, people of Ukrainians are living under the despotic rule of Russia. And the fact that this is basically now, because of the geopolitics of the leader of Moscow, the Tsar of Russia, a forever war that he has no exit in any way, shape, or form. So what is being brought to the table here by massing troops in the region is simply a bargaining chip to say, look, and certainly the White House has amplified the Russian talking point of, trying to drive home, look, you guys are about life preservation, then prove it. And, that's really unfair, because life preservation, all life is sacred. And in Moscow, without getting into, supernatural or anything, there's a disdain for life coming from the geopolitical center. In fact, they almost, if you ever saw Schindler's List, and it wasn't far from here, the quote, I don't want to go into the quote and the reference, but they were saying that it was almost like this disdain for life, and I'll misquote it because I don't want to quote it exactly because the words are so hurtful, especially if anybody's sensitive. And in me, I quote statistics, but of course this is all painful. They said it's like eating noodles. Once you start, you can't stop, if you remember that metaphor from that movie. So Moscow has a disdain for life, and they're using that card to say, we're not going to be successful. They're not saying that, but we're going to continue this offensive. And what they're doing is they're trying to invoke emotion in addition to using the V2 strategy of hitting civilian targets in Kharkiv. And that reference, the V2 strategy, that when they understood, the H guy in Germany understood he wasn't going to cross the channel and take England because they just were not going to give up. He decided just to, use it as a force of show against civilians. So, V1, V2. So if you take that into play, that's probably the rationale behind Moscow and projecting this show of force in front of Kharkiv, that, they are pressuring this life because every life is sacred. One loss, that could be like an Albert Einstein, that could be a Mozart that's lost, and it is sacred. So they're pressuring using that tactic. It's not going to work because light always wins over darkness, and it is a nexus of darkness in this geopolitical czar's, realm. So the Kharkiv defensive, based on probability tables, and I'm somebody who works with probabilities. Unfortunately, I don't want to put human life in that category, but based on probability tables, there's just no chance, zero chance, 0.000 chance that the Kharkiv offensive will mean anything other than a loss of life. If we want to make the world a better place, which we all do, we have to realize that. Right now, Russia has continued to be hollowed out from within. They're hitting logistical points that, feed this war machine. Their economy is down, whether it's the banks, the interest rate, and anecdotal evidence from people I know in Russia saying the economy is down. It's overheated. It's a displacement of resources from capital goods production to, obviously non-productive capital, which has been all hollowed out. And then soon it will be like a cardboard, a cardboard superhero. They're not a superhero, trust me. That you just punch, a kid will just push down and it will fall down. And it's going to collapse from within. So Ukraine's strategy is, let's just see if that can be encouraged, because partisans are rising, not just from Ukraine inside Russia, but actually Russians. Russians are rising to the occasion. And these hits are going to be more frequent and more damaging to the Russian infrastructure. So this Kharkiv offensive, this summer offensive, this spring offensive, it's nothing. If it even gets off the ground like a propeller of an old-fashioned biplane, it's wrong way Feldman. It's just wrong way Feldman times two. It's not going to do anything. So that's good news for Ukraine. It's good news for the world. It looks like the US is starting to reconsider as the White House is suffering defeats on the tariff issue. And I can do another video on that. The White House isn't reconsidering, but Congress is its geopolitical stance towards Russia, and that could include further sanctions. So the Kharkiv defensive is much to do about nothing. The summer offensive and the heat and the swelter, they're going to be stuck in the mud. My name is Mark Bernaut. I'm a monetary economist. Have a beautiful day. Thank you very much.